Tonight, a bombshell shakeup in the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Commissioner Clayton Fernando is out, and ACP Shannon Knowles makes history as the first woman to take the helm. The stunning announcement follows a U.S. indictment implicating senior officers in the force. In a whirlwind of events, the Prime Minister revealed both Fernando's resignation and Knowles' appointment within hours. The drama spilled over into Parliament, where tensions erupted. In a moment reminiscent of Black Tuesday nearly 60 years ago, the ceremonial mace thrown out of a window, igniting chaos in the lower chamber. This season of On the Record ends with reflections on the monumental moments of December 4th. In tonight's episode, Mace Mayhem, the indictment that brought down the House, we dive into the fallout from a day that changed history. Joining us are two outspoken critics offering their unique perspectives on the chaos and its implications. As we dissect the past, we also cast an eye toward a future still taking shape before us. I'm Candino Knowles in for Jerome Sawyer. Our show begins on the other side of this break.
You have an opportunity in your discretion to permit us to put on the public record our views on a matter of critical legal. Now I will say. Get him! Ah, my. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House be suspended until for 15 minutes.
Tonight, we unpack the events of December 4th, an unforgettable day in Parliament. The Prime Minister's bombshell announcement that Police Commissioner is out was soon followed by chaos as the ceremonial mace, also out, tossed from a window in the House of Assembly. At the center of it all, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Deputy Leader of the Free National Movement and MP for St. Barnabas. But with the dust now settled, we're happy to welcome to the show Opposition Leader Michael Pintard, who joins us to break down the fallout. Mr. Pintard, welcome to the show. Welcome
Good to be back on the show.
All right. Some unprecedented times, as we saw there in that open just a moment ago. But before we jump into the crux of our conversation, I wonder what was going through your mind as this was all unfolding?
Again, the opposition has consistently petitioned the government to answer key questions raised by the Bahamian people and that we put on the record, and they have declined. They have ducked and dodged often. The Speaker, who ought to function in an independent way as the leader of the third branch of government, has aided and abetted this administration and have permitted herself to be directed. So in that moment, again, the frustration and disappointment in the attempt to muzzle the opposition had reached a boiling point. We're fed up of what is being done. And while everything that you saw was not predetermined, we were settled on the issue that if we could not have our say, where the government has the majority and will generally have their way, then we are prepared to speak up no matter the cost.
You alluded to something that I want to get to in a minute, but After the Prime Minister made his statement in Parliament that Commissioner Fernando had resigned, we saw how Speaker Patricia Devoshi ordered the communication be brought up. At that time, National Security Minister and MP for Freetown, Wayne Monroe, he took the floor to table the bill. You took the floor at the same time.
No, in fact, I preceded him. And in fact, she acknowledged me prior to him standing.
We actually heard you say you sought to get the Speaker's attention. We heard you explaining that. But the Speaker insisted she move with procedures of the House, and there's where we saw things take a turn. I want us to take a look at this clip from the Prime Minister's address on the issue last night.
Moments after the Minister of National Security rose to give his communication to introduce this legislation, the Leader of the Opposition, Michael Pintard, interrupted the Minister and requested to speak. The Speaker of the House reminded the Leader of the Opposition that the rules allowed statements by cabinet ministers at that time, and his requests will be addressed at the appropriate point in the order of business.
And Mr. Pintard, prior to this incident, the Prime Minister had criticized you and members of your party for not following the rules. Your response to that?
My response has been consistent to those kinds of assertions. The Prime Minister is a serial lawbreaker. We have multiple pieces of legislation that he does not follow, have not followed. The procurement piece of legislation is one of the most egregious examples where he does not follow competitive bidding. He's committed to single sourcing contracts for extremely large amounts of money without disclosing the terms of those agreements. He's the same Prime Minister that went to Bermuda using public funds to fund a private political venture. He's in no moral position to talk about following the rules. And in the House itself, he has been party, much like the Minister says, in misleading the House without following the convention of resigning afterwards. So he was wrong then on those issues, and he's wrong now. We have followed the procedures. In fact, we wrote to the Speaker, and a day in advance on this occasion, the Speaker addressed our previous letter the week before at the top of the order. And interestingly enough, she disregarded it, indicating that she would come to that at some point in the meeting. But we know their strategy. Their strategy is to get on the record what they desire, and then they adjourn the House. And so I was seeking to get an assurance from the Speaker that at that point, am I going to be permitted to speak on behalf of the Bahamian people, which she did not address properly.
All right, and we talked about rules and procedures. I know that you have been critical of government's administration of House proceedings as well as the agenda. Are those criticisms still valid today?
Oh, they are valid. Unfortunately, the Speaker doesn't appreciate the power that she possesses. We want an independent Parliament so that you can have, again, debate between both sides, and you are able to get what the people wish to have on the record. And what you do not need is a speaker who would permit him or herself to be bullied, or they would collude with the executive branch of government in silencing a minority. And we're unprepared. We've been very measured. So we're unprepared to permit them to continue to do so. And so that again is what gave rise to the approach.
All right. With all we've seen unfolding, including the U.S. indictment implicating senior law enforcement officers and a top government official, do you believe, by virtue of this happening, there is a concerted effort to silence the opposition in Parliament?
Whenever there are sensitive matters that can potentially affect the political capital or reputation of the Progressive Liberal Party, they are prepared in the House and otherwise to silence critics. And many members of the Progressive Liberal Party have been subject to attacks, whether it's in the grapevine or from the chairman or some other member whenever they dissent. The opposition has faced even a more aggressive sanction by this administration, and we think it is inappropriate. We should have free and fair debate inside the House. Bahamians should be able to register their concern. Public servants who are concerned about how ministers behave, as they had concerns in the case of Keith Bell, should not be forced into retirement or put on administrative leave because you have disobeyed an unlawful directive from a policymaker.
I want to take a look at this next clip from the Prime Minister's national address. And in it, He's criticizing the actions of the opposition that we saw on December 4th. Take a look.
The response of the members of the opposition was to shout down the speaker. In a clearly planned and coordinated assault, the deputy leader of the opposition, Shannon Daw Cartwright, and the other opposition members then disrupted the proceedings and grabbed the speaker's mace. My fellow Bahamians, I would have hoped that at a moment when our country's reputation is under fire, that all of us could move forward together and put country first. Unfortunately, the members of the opposition chose to put on a show instead.
Mr. Pintard, Prime Minister says the opposition put on a show. My question to you is, was this an orchestrated event as suggested by the Prime Minister there?
The Prime Minister recently, in the last few weeks, made a point about Bahamians who are suffering and are vulnerable, that the condition they find themselves in is a result of the choices they make. Obviously, they did not choose to raise BPL rates. They did not choose to increase the cost of food. He showed then that he was tone deaf. Once again, he is showing that he is tone deaf. The Bahamian people are concerned about the reputation of the country in general, our institutions in particular, and public servants who have been sullied by this indictment.
Just this indictment or even before this?
Before. There are other instances, particularly in law enforcement. So what Bahamians want is a restoration of the good name of the Bahamas, and they want the message to be clear. The vast majority of Bahamians in general, public servants and law enforcement in particular, are living right.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister, whose job it is to preside over our reputation and to protect it by making sure we have honest gatekeepers in Parliament, in the public service, in law enforcement, has failed at his job. So patriotism would actually mean that he would do his job. He has failed to do his job, and his Minister of National Security and the Commissioner failed to execute.
All right. With your criticisms, since the chaos, we've learned of at least 2 injuries. Deputy Speaker Sylvanus Petty and the Sergeant at Arms. Have you or your deputy reached out to any of them?
I've spoken to Officer Penniman, who, again, is a part of the family, of our collective parliamentary family. I've spoken to Deputy Speaker Petty. I highly doubt the Prime Minister has reached out to both of them. And the Prime Minister was dishonest in his statement. The entire country has the ability to see the video.
That dishonest how?
He was dishonest in giving the impression that the opposition had anything to do with their injury. In fact, while the deputy was throwing the mace out, both of those persons were seeking to restrain him from doing so. The officers that rushed to assist them, the video shows it absolutely clearly. One officer Officer Penniman knocked to the ground, and Mr. Petty was hit in his head. So the Prime Minister...
So this was not a matter of assault?
Oh, please. Assault, yeah, but certainly by officers who were present, not by our member. And so the Prime Minister, again, his usual cold face, being honestly misleading in his remarks.
So you think purely deflection?
Theatrics.
That's it. The theatrics in unprecedented times. Was this at all what you expected, though, that we'd be talking about today?
No, listen, we have to keep the focus where the focus should be. We have had multiple Bahamians who have been indicted, not just in this one situation, in Canada, in Jamaica. We have, over an extended period of time, persons who should be upholding the law being implicated in a wide range of scandals.
But we heard at one point, one MP shouting, "You're no Lyndon Pinling," right? This is as those events were happening. Was this the goal? Nearly 60 years after the infamous events of Black Tuesday on 1965?
This is not about grandstanding. This is about standing up in a way that we believe the government is failing to stand up. And so if we must be more aggressive in future, we intend to be more aggressive in future. As we said on Bay Street, as we were being pushed as parliamentarians to go behind the barricade, we said, no, we're going to stand in the front of the barricade, not obstructing traffic, to talk to our people. And if you push us, we will push you back.
And that we saw. We'll leave it there for now, Mr. Pintard. When we come back, we talk more about the resignation of Police Commissioner Clayton Fernander and the appointment of a new one. On the Record is back right after this. Welcome back to On the Record. Mace Mayhem, the indictment that brought down the House. We are joined by Opposition Leader Michael Pintard. And before we jump back into our discussion, a new commissioner and first female prepares to take office just after the current commissioner resigns. Prime Minister Philip Davis making the announcement in a short address from his office late Wednesday afternoon, ending speculation that Assistant Commissioner Shanta Knowles will become the country's first female commissioner. Take a look.
I'm recommending that the Assistant Commissioner of Police, with responsibility for the Northern District, Shanta Emily Knowles, be appointed as the nation's next Commissioner of Police. She's a strong and seasoned professional, ready to lead the force through an era of substantial reform.
And was this the right move?
Again, much like the Prime Minister, we are learning more about her track record as an officer. And again, I asked on yesterday for an opportunity to consult, having not considered her in that capacity before. And I've had a chance to speak to a number of persons who I respect highly. And it assisted us in sending a letter to the Prime Minister this morning, as he and I and the Deputy had agreed that he would receive a correspondence first thing this morning. That again, we have no objection to her appointment. We wish her well. It is our prayer and hope that she will be able to initiate reforms.
And I want to ask, the Prime Minister said in Parliament yesterday that he would invite you to his office for consultation on the new commissioner. Did that still happen?
Yes, that we did have a discussion, and it is at that time I asked for an opportunity for us to be able to consult.
Was it a more amicable meeting?
Oh, it was very, very, very civil.
So very different than what we saw.
In fact, we consistently have amicable conversations privately, and that is why I know that in the Parliament that they are engaged in a tremendous amount of theatrics, and so again we came to a conclusion that this morning we would send in a correspondence, which we did. We wish her well. It is in our collective interest that she succeeds. We will give her every cooperation from the Free National Movement.
Any thoughts, Mr. Pintard, on who her replacement should be in the northern region? And obviously, you represent a constituency in that region, so there is some level of investment there. Who do you think should be that?
I would love to have a conversation
because we've heard
with the Prime Minister, but we are deeply concerned about a couple of the persons who are in the North. There are a series of damning allegations that have been raised that we ought to carefully litigate before we rush to any appointment. This is a moment for all of us to do some self-reflection and to look at our agencies, and not to get personal, but to look at systemic shortcomings or failures. And it is my hope that we will pause relative to Grand Bahama and have a sober and careful investigation before we proceed.
And we've heard calls for a Grand Bahamian to hold that post. Is that something that you're advocating
for? That would be the preference. But what trumps everything is someone who is suitably qualified. We do believe that the pattern of promotion by the Davis administration since the change in the election has marginalized a number of very talented Grand Bahamians. But we want to make sure we get the right person whose integrity is intact and their reputation is beyond reproach.
What about the outgoing commissioner? We've heard calls for his resignation from across society, some insisting it was the right thing to do to restore trust in the force and in accountability in government. Do you think, though, that it's having or will have that effect?
It is, again, one of several fundamental changes that must occur. And so when the Prime Minister made that announcement, unfortunately, he seemed to have expected some degree of euphoria that all of a sudden things would change. There were several key recommendations. Resignation of Wayne Monroe. Both he and the commissioner presided over a period of tremendous failure.
So you
at the
believe
police
the
force.
National Security Minister
without question.
So that should be the next resignation we're seeing?
Without question. And there ought to be a commission of inquiry. So important is the issue of clarifying how far the corruption extends that you must have an overarching mandate to investigate related agencies, members of parliament that may have such a close relationship with not just the handful of officers who've gone afoul of the law, but persons in the informal sector, criminals. It's important to examine all of that in its totality.
Let me bring this to the discussion. The Commissioner Clayton Fernandez was removed from active duty under the Minnis administration. He was returned as commissioner under the Davis administration. I just want to know, in hindsight, was that a mistake?
In terms of moving him in
being
particular?
removed under the former administration.
Let me say this. Anytime you move 5 or 6 very senior officers in my estimation, and there isn't clear, transparent reasons why, it creates a degree of disruption in the functioning of those organizations. If there are justifiable reasons for doing so, I think that kind of move ought to be explained to the public. I've said this previously, but again, that's not the issue that anything turns on in this moment. What we are concerned about in this moment is, do we have the facts in terms of which persons who remain or what other agencies have members who in some way are involved in criminal activity or unethical behavior, and a commission gives us an opportunity to find that out.
And we'll get to the legislation that actually speaks to that, but I want to know, how does the new commissioner in the force begin to come back from this?
I think it's important for the senior officers who remain to embrace that officer, because clearly we're human beings, so people will have ill feelings that she has leapfrogged several persons who...
So we need to rally behind this new commissioner.
We need the Prime Minister and his new Minister of National Security to preside over. Well, I mean, because I do not believe. Well, first of all, I don't believe that the Attorney General or the present Minister of National Security supports the position of the Prime Minister in what he has just done. The Prime Minister was under tremendous pressure. He needed to move with a sense of urgency to shift the headline of today. And secondly, to shift the conversation.
Why don't you believe that?
Wait,
why don't you believe that?
And so intelligence. And so again, I think it is very important that they preside over a healing process in the police force, even if they have to get some outside help. And the other officers that remain, that they ought to embrace the new commissioner, we don't know if it's acting or commissioner, in order for her to lay out the plan of action. And that is not a plan of action that should be narrowly scripted by the PR team in OPM and delivered to them, but it has to be a sober come to Jesus discussion with other officers about the way forward.
When did you learn of the recent U.S. indictment?
We learned of it when the public did, but we're not surprised. The average Bahamian that's watching your show right now, firmly aware that there are numerous persons who are engaged in illegal activity across international borders, and that there are persons in authority who are also aware. I've raised a critical question in the House of Assembly, in private discussions with government officials, in the public domain, where if I am wrong, the government can sue. Is the government prepared to say that at no point over the last 3 years they have entered into a relationship with somebody who, or persons or companies that are of interest to the police, locally and internationally? We have reason to believe that they are fully aware that there are persons who are acting outside the law in a suspicious manner, and they ought not be entering into contractual arrangements with them.
That said, you've criticized the Prime Minister's handling of this situation. The PLP has assessed you and your party as using this situation for political mileage. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Listen, we are in opposition. A part of our responsibility is to hold the government accountable for choices that they are making, promises that they have made and are not keeping. We are simply doing our job. This is not about politics. This is about saving lives. Let me give you an example. Just recently, in the last few months, we've had explosive voice notes that have, again, caused tremendous reputational damage to not just law enforcement, but we believe policy makers. Because how does one get to explain that as a result of a robbery, a robbery of an armored car, that you have no less than at least 7 deaths associated with that particular robbery? To me, that is more explosive than a U.S. indictment in many ways.
So should that be the first thing that the new commissioner take on?
No, we don't have the luxury. We don't have the luxury
because
of waiting.
we heard from the former commissioner or the outgoing commissioner that we would hear on the investigation involving the senior officer Michael Johnson. He promised the Bahamian people that we would know before the end of the year. Is that the thing then? Just based on what you said, is that the thing that the new commissioner needs to be focused on?
I want to at least complete the concept by simply saying this.
Sure.
The loss of at least 7 lives, 3 innocent persons who were murdered in Step Street, Fox Hill, because shooters were looking for a particular person. That matter should have captivated this government's attention and the senior rank of the police force in such a way that the public can see a fundamentally different approach in how they are investigating. They should have, in a transparent way, invited international help. And we shouldn't make it specific to one officer whose voice we heard. It is a systemic problem. But we saw no change in the Prime Minister or the Minister of National Security approach or the outgoing commissioner. And to your point about whether that should be the first thing, it should be dealt with simultaneously. And I'm advised that the outgoing commissioner will have an opportunity to update the public over the course of the next 7 or 8 days on that particular subject before he demits office. The outside time is, I understand, somewhere around 14 days before he demits office.
And that's from yesterday.
Correct. But,
okay.
But again, it's very difficult to sometimes take that word.
Let me ask you this. In his own national address this past Sunday, the outgoing commissioner revealed intentions for a full revamp of the force with civilian oversight. That's a direction I think you support going in?
Oh, we called for an independent body to oversee those investigations. And I want the Bahamian people to know the resignation of the commissioner, the announcement of an independent oversight committee is a result of their activism. Excuse me, it's their activism. Because the government has had 3 years to address this issue. The commissioner, by his own admission, talked about systemic corruption. So announcements in the face of tremendous public outcry, we take that with a grain of salt. We called for those measures to take place, but this is not a new call. We have done so 2 years ago, close to 3 years ago.
Yeah. And that, once the dust settled on the pandemonium we saw yesterday in the House, proceedings did continue, though, with the tabling of new legislation. I want us to just take a listen to what the Prime Minister had to say about it in his address last night.
I also announced new legislation to create, for the first time, independent oversight of the police. Independent oversight can play an essential role in strengthening trust between the police and the communities they serve.
All right. You know what? Your thoughts.
2 very quick things. One is the Prime Minister has just contradicted the Minister of National Security and others in his cabinet who said when I raised this issue before in the House of Assembly months ago that they already have independent oversight. So what the member for Marco City seeks to have put in place is already in place. That's one thing. But they often have contradictions between each other, NIB, BPL, etc. Secondly, the Prime Minister talks about legislation that he intends to introduce. He did the same thing after the indictment dropped. one of the reasons we take what he says with a grain of salt is because he has existing legislation that provides for some independent oversight that he seeks not to empower and give strength to. The Ombudsman Act, which we just passed, which would allow the average citizen to, again, bring into question the actions or decisions made by public servants in positions of authority. We have the Freedom of Information Act that would allow the average citizens within particular terms to access information to see what motivated some of the decisions we made behind the scenes. So his announcements of legislation cannot be taken seriously given his track record in complying with existing legislation.
So, Mr. Pinto, let me ask you, why then haven't we moved to enforce the law in that instance? When we talk about the Ombudsman, the Freedom of Information Act, which is something we've been following since the Ingram administration of 2007, right? And here we are now in 2024, and
Freedom of Information, procurement, Ombudsman. If you don't have a whole lot to hide, you have very little difficulty with transparency and accountability. The Davis administration, the Davis-Cooper administration, appears to have quite a bit to hide. We can't find out the terms of some of the contracts that they have signed. Simple terms. How long is it for? Exactly what are the interest rates that the Bahamian people will have to pay back in the arrangements that you have entered into? These are basic requirements of any serious public-private partnership or contract that we sign as a result of competitive bidding. They are unwilling to be open about that. So these sensitive matters now, we have very little expectation of them being open.
Listen, our discussion today, all stemming from that U.S. indictment, right? We saw recently, it came down from the Department of Justice, the story, as well as Wednesday's proceedings. It's now making international headlines, some calling it an embarrassment for us as a people. I wonder, though, how worried are you about what the fallout will be? The continued fallout.
We are very worried. The IDB recently released a study that indicated, a couple of things. One is the cost to the country for the violence that exists in the country is upwards of 100 million. There is a cost whenever you draw attention to matters related to violence. So a part of the indictment talked not only about drug trafficking, but the arms that are required to police that and the movement of arms. If the Prime Minister is going to be successful in his joint action with Mexico in suing companies that are responsible for manufacturing weapons that end up in the Bahamas, he has to get a handle on this indictment and the related issues in Bahamian culture. Because now persons are able to argue the very persons that have concern or expressing concerns about the movement of arms, your administration or the administration you preside over is being implicated in it. So the fallout is real in terms of what is happening.
We're just about out of time, but I really do want to get your thoughts on these last two questions. So as quickly as you can, I want to know how do we tackle this how does your party tackle this without seemingly coming across as campaigning or looking for political points?
We be truthful. We should have a sober conversation with the Bahamian public, who is already in a place where policymakers are just getting. The Bahamian people know what's happening on the ground. They understand the connections between many of the players, policymakers, gangsters in the constituencies that they represent. Persons who are engaged in unethical behavior. What the public wants is for us to clean it up. There is no way around challenging those that have the power to do better.
Yeah.
We are out of power because apparently the public didn't feel that we were doing the things we needed to. They are in power. They need to fix it.
Finally, so much more that we didn't get to tonight, but I want to find out from you finally, are you concerned though about the eventual response from the United States and perhaps jurisdictions that we have diplomatic relations with once this U.S. indictment continues to unfold?
We need to restore trust between the Bahamas and our number one ally, which would be the Americans. And one way to do that is to make sure that our laws, that we are insisting that policymakers, public servants, private sector people comply with our law. The Americans are not paragons of virtue, but that does not excuse us from doing our best to live righteously.
And last, anything else you would change about what happened yesterday? Anything that you would change?
Well, we intend to return to Bay Street next week. And one of the things we hope to change is to continue to increase the number of right-thinking Bahamians who want to send a message to this government that we in Parliament work for them. And we intend to do everything to protect the reputation of our country, our institutions, and law-abiding officers and public servants.
And that's what this comes down to, reputation of country. Mr. Pintard,
Correct.
Thank you so much for being
my pleasure.
with us
Thank
today.
you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Show.
When we come back, another critic weighs in on these unprecedented times. You're watching On the Record. Stay with us.
You back me up? Disgusting.
Take him down. Let's go. Keep moving. Keep moving. Down. Let's go. Down. Let's go down. Go.
Certainly a moment for the history books. Welcome back to On the Record. I am happy to be joined right now by an outspoken Bahamian leader with a devoted following. We welcome tonight leader of the Coalition of Independence, Lincoln Bain. Mr. Bain, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you for having me.
All right, listen, Lincoln, you've been a fierce critic of both the government and the official opposition. But before we jump in, I want us to take a look at this excerpt from the Prime Minister's national address late Wednesday afternoon.
This is a serious constitutional moment, requiring serious consideration by serious people. In attempting to emulate the efforts of Sir Lyndon Pinling and Sir Milo Butler, the opposition shows they fundamentally do not understand the meaning of that moment or their responsibilities in this moment. There'll be time for politics, but today was not that time. The moment called for statesmanship, not self-indulgent theatrics. Their conduct in the House today cannot be justified. We hope that they will learn to be more serious about the business of the people. We should confront our most difficult challenges as one national community.
All right, Lincoln, I want to get your initial thoughts on the events of December 4th and what we just heard there from the Prime Minister.
Well, I'll start by saying with the Prime Minister, I'm not sure who wrote his speech, but Sir Milo Butler didn't throw the mace out of the House. He never did. It was Sir Lyndon Pinling who did so. And Sir Milo Butler threw the hourglass out of the House, I think it was in 1956, when they restricted the speakers in the House, the MPs, to 12 minutes. And so I think the Prime Minister should know better. But it's time for a shake-up in this country. And so I appreciate what the FNM tried to do to wake up this country. We needed a good shaking up. And I think that shaking up started last week when me and a lot of our supporters went to the House of Assembly. And in the House of Assembly, we called for the Commissioner of Police to step down, and we decried what they were doing to the opposition because we thought it was wrong. And then we went down and defended the opposition. And in his press conference, you know, I spoke to him in strong terms. I felt I had to shake him up.
So that was support from your side.
Yeah, we supported them outside to the media. Yeah. And then when we came into his press conference, I spoke to him in strong terms. I let him know that he has to stop being weak and that he has to use the powers of the opposition and of the PAC.
Did we see that on Wednesday?
That was last week, Wednesday.
Yeah.
And so
did we see that strength yesterday. Would you say that that was the show of strength?
Right, and that's where I was
Yeah.
going to go with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
We saw them do something because I think they felt that they had to do something because of the way we addressed them. And I think they felt like we showed them up. We just were trying to get them to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And they didn't do their jobs. We don't need the opposition being activists. I'll be honest with you. I appreciate them shaking things up, but we don't need you to be activists. We need you to do your job. For example, they have the powers of the PAC. And so everything he complains about normally, he can just use the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee, and summons documents, summons bank accounts, summons people, subpoena, and summons people to come before him. This is what we need you to do. We need real action. So Lyndon Pindon didn't just protest, etc. He would jump on a plane and go before the Queen because we were under the Queen at the time. He would go before her. He would use his powers to lead the opposition and force the government to do certain things. That's what you need. There was a time when Perry Christie disagreed with an appointment made by Hubert Ingram to the Senate. As an independent senator that he was appointing. And Perry Christie said, no, that person isn't independent, that's an F&M. And Ingram said, well, I consulted with you, that's all I have to do. Perry said, no, I'll take you to court. And Perry Christie won that case.
Yeah.
This is what we need opposition doing, not theatrics. We need you in the House of Assembly and in the courts, etc., defending the people.
I want to ask you, the Prime Minister announced the resignation of one and the appointment of another commissioner in just hours of each other. Was it the right thing for the commissioner to step down, Commissioner Clayton Fernando? Was that the right thing?
Yes, I think it was the right thing because he's been failing under this entire administration. Crime has gone out of control. We've had a lot of complaints about police officers and their actions. A lot of police had to be arrested. And so the failure has come under him. When the team is doing bad, the coach gets fired, not necessarily the team. And so he, as a leader, should have taken that stand. And if he didn't, then the Prime Minister should have moved to have him removed a long time ago. I think that it was too delayed, but it was the right thing to do. And so we can get some fresh minds on this.
When do you think he should have been removed or resigned? And I think that should have happened.
I think as soon as the previous scandal came out with the voice notes with another senior police officer, I think at that point...
You're talking about Michael Johnson.
Yes, Michael Johnson. I think at that point, when that happened, it shows that a lot of things, and that wasn't the first thing, a lot of things are happening on your watch, and maybe you're not cut out for this particular position. And so we may need to put you in another role, maybe be ambassador to England or do something else. But this may not be the role for you.
He's out. ACP Shannon Knowles, she's in.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts on the historic appointment of the first woman to take the helm?
Yeah, so I don't think that person should be promoted to any position or appointed because of their sex, whether you're a man or woman. I think that she is going to be a commissioner, and she has the potential to be a good commissioner. And so I think that should be our focus because she has risen to the ranks on her merits. And so I want to congratulate her on that. The problem, though, I have is that people are appointed to these positions, but they're still under the control of the government. And we need to change our system. It needs to come to the point now where these kinds of positions are elected positions, not just an independent commission doing it because they just put their cronies on these boards to do it.
But that's going to require some change to the way.
And that's what we're proposing. We're proposing to change the way our government is set up. And so we're going to have elected officials. I had commissioners of police who have complained to me about the things they wanted to do, and they could not do it because their hands was tied because it seemed like the government wanted to go in a different direction. That's a constitutional position, and they should have the power to be independent, their own budget to a certain amount, so they don't have to depend on the Prime Minister. The same thing for the Chief Justice, so that we can have independent persons. Now, there needs to be more than just the power of the Prime Minister to appoint these positions. The Prime Minister should be able to appoint who he wants in that position, but we should have another body that investigates these persons and vet them, like they do in the U.S., where the Senate has that responsibility, but it's done publicly, so we know what's going on.
Are we prepared for vetting?
Yes, we are.
If at that level we're beginning the vetting process, most will expect that will happen across the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. Are we ready for that?
I think we have to do it we're now saying that there's a culture of corruption. And if we want to stop that culture of corruption, we're going to have to do that. We have to vet persons in senior positions.
I'm going to come back to that, but I want to get your thoughts before we move on about who should replace the ACP. She was in charge of the northern region up until the Prime Minister announced her appointment. Any thoughts on who should take that position?
There are quite a few very qualified persons. I don't want to call their name because then they might say I'm promoting them. That might hurt them. But there are several young persons who are there right now who actually are qualified to be Commissioner of Police. In my view, there's some educated persons and very young persons, some with law degrees, etc., that can do it. Chaswell Hanna is a good person. Yeah, I call his name. Robinson, ACP Robinson is a good young person. The next generation who could come up, they actually qualify, according to some people, to be Commissioner of Police. So they can do well in Grand Bahama.
What do you think is the mandate for the new commissioner from the Bahamian people?
The first thing is to gain the trust of the people. Without the trust of the people, a police department cannot function. And so without that, you're not going to get help from the people if they feel that if they come forward and talk to you, that could be leaked. If they report, someone they love to you, that they could be abused. And so the first thing is to regain the trust of the people more than anything else. And then we have to root out the corruption. But we believe that the corruption comes from the top, from the politicians. So people ask me, how are you going to clean up corruption in these civil services? They have people who are still going to be in there. I believe that that the vast majority, more than 99%, are really good people who want to see this country prosper. And there are a few bad apples that the politicians put in positions so that they could do their bidding. And you saw examples of that with the immigration situation that we exposed. There were persons in position in immigration who did not want what was happening to happen. And of course, you saw where they spoke out. And the minister was eventually moved. We believe that all of the ministries, all of the forces have good people that want this country to prosper, and they're tired of the political corruption.
In his own national address this past Sunday, the former commissioner revealed intentions for a full revamp of the force with civilian oversight. And I think you alluded to that in what you just said there. But is this the direction that the new commissioner should be headed in? Do you believe that that is what is necessary to get us to where we need to be?
Yes, we need to have professional civilian oversight because it's difficult to have the police investigating police, and people don't trust you if that's the case. You can't go to me to complain about my brother. That's how people feel. And so they don't trust the process. And so, yes, that's a start, and we need to be able to do that, and it needs to be extremely independent, and it needs to have persons from both sides of the field on it. Otherwise, the trust won't be there.
In this recent U.S. indictment implicating senior law enforcement officers, is it the only reason that citizens have a certain level of mistrust when it comes to law and order in the country?
No. There are people who have experienced a lot of different things on personal levels. People are always complaining about circumstances they deal with. You have police officers who complain that politicians interfere with cases. They get instructions from certain people. I was a police officer officially for 10 years. I experienced that personally. But the general public has seen a lot of things happening that caused them to not trust the situation. But it was mostly coming from the top. The first thing that happened was a commissioner who was reportedly a friend of the Prime Minister was appointed. Now, we don't have a problem with you appointing someone who might happen to be a friend if there's merit to appointing them. But then what happened is another red flag, which was you gave him money for a settlement. It wasn't a court case decision. You just settled and gave him money and didn't disclose how much it is. Now, all public servants are supposed to disclose their income to make sure we don't have corruption. So why is it a problem for you to tell us how much money it is? And so that causes a lot of mistrust that he is just a puppet of the Prime Minister.
Has this further polarized the country along party lines? And with that, how do we restore faith and confidence in our police force?
I think once we get the right leadership of the police force and leadership of the country, we won't have to worry about these things anymore. We need a government that is going to make these these department and divisions of our society independent. We don't need the justice system dependent on the prime minister for a budget or solely for appointment without vetting. The same thing with the police force. We need independence. We need to elect our senior officials in this country, chiefs of police on different islands. And that's why we have a policy called island states and city government. We want to take power away from the politician and give it to the people so that the money made on your island stays on your island. That gives you an independence. You pay a royalty to the central government. And so you're able to do what you need to do and not depend on a politician. City government does the same thing. It allows the people of the country to put in place a mayor, have their own budget, and do what they need and not have to depend on any politician. And this is going to restore trust. They know who the crooked contractors are, and they know who to hire. And so let them do that.
Right.
And the money should
because
stay
they're in the
within
communities.
Yes,
so
they're in
they
the communities.
know and they understand, right?
Right. And they know who should be their chief of police because they would know who is the crooked chief of police or police officer and who is not. And so let them choose. Give the power to the people.
What should the Prime Minister and his cabinet be doing right now in this moment, to restore trust?
Prepare for election. They need to call an election right away.
Is it that serious?
It's that serious. It has been a traumatic failure. There are people who feel that this is worse than it was in the 1980s when we were embarrassed internationally. And so I think that they should call it a day, like Minnis did, and just move on and hope that the people will, they can make a transformation and then come back 20 years from now.
I want to get back to what you just said, embarrassment. But before that, is this situation that we are witnessing right now, what we saw on December 4th, the events leading up to December 4th, is it not symptomatic of what some are seeing as potentially rampant corruption?
Yes, the country, corruption is endemic, but it's not for the people. We want to see what is right. We want to see what is good. It's the politicians who keep all of the control and they determine everything. They want everything to go through them. And that's where the problem is in this country. We have to loosen it up and we have to give power to the people. That's the only way you're going to end corruption because you're going to have accountability at every single level that you can now monitor. You won't have politicians in Nassau determining what happens in the family island, who goes to the family island. You won't have the nepotism, etc., from one man or a few politicians determining what happens in the country. That's how we're going to clean this up.
We also saw the tabling of the Independent Commission of Investigations Bill 2024. National Security Minister Wayne Munro brought it to Parliament on Wednesday. Your initial thoughts on the proposed law? I know you've talked about what needs to be done, how we move forward. Is this the way?
I support it in principle. Sometimes they put these little hooks in the laws and loopholes so that they can still have their way. And so once I see the law, then I can determine whether it's a good law or not. But the name of it and what they say is the intent sounds good at this time. But I haven't seen the law yet. I'm going to look it up. But definitely we need to have more independent oversight. I've been calling for this for years.
Yeah. You said something earlier. You used the word embarrassment. The story of the U.S. indictment that we saw from the Department of Justice, as well as Wednesday's proceedings, now making international headlines. One of our international partners, Reuters, had the story published last night on its wire, which meant that went to networks across the world. We see the headlines today, right? Some calling it an embarrassment, as you said. How worried should we be about the fallout?
I have friends and counterparts all over the world. In the Caribbean, there are a lot of politicians who are now reaching out to me. They say what the COI is doing is inspiring them to stand up and to make change, and third parties, etc. And I have persons in the U.S., investors, etc. What was very curious was that an investor reached out to me and sent me a clip of a video that no one in the news covered. And it was the same video of the House proceedings. And he said, no one noticed this. He said that one of the members of Parliament, he's talking about Adrian White, went over to the window while the Prime Minister was speaking, just before they did the Mace thing. And he went over to the window, and it appears that he opened the window and prepared the way. And then the whole House stopped because he was at the window. You could see the Deputy Prime Minister look at him like, what is he doing? And the Prime Minister stopped like, what's going on? And he was asked to have a seat, and he went and sat down. And shortly after that, Shannon Don came, grabbed the mace, went to the window, and threw it out. That window is normally locked as far as I know, or should be, but no one noticed that happened. What does that mean? That means that was all staged. It didn't happen because she was refusing to let them speak.
So you think it was orchestrated?
It was
a concerted effort?
It clearly was. And sometimes there's no problem with that, but this was clearly planned to go in there and cause a disruption, and it was staged. And the fact that Adrian went over to the window and opened the window first suggests that they planned that. But my biggest problem with that is I told Pintard, I gave him instructions to be strong, stop being weak. If that is going to happen, you as the leader should have been the one to do it. It is disgraceful that he allowed his subordinate to do that. It means that he doesn't have the courage to take a strong stance.
I want to get back to the criticisms, but I want to ask, do you see this as a turning point in the political landscape?
Not that particular action. I don't see it as a turning point because it's more of the same. It's more of a distraction. Again, like I said in the beginning, we need the opposition fighting for the people with their powers that they are given. All right, using the powers of the PAC, etc. That's what we need. We don't need a show and a distraction. And I think after I asked him to use the powers of the opposition, this was used as a distraction to make people forget and use emotions and hype.
Lincoln, a lot of people may be disillusioned by politics.
Yes.
By virtue of what's been happening recently, but also successively. How do you tackle this issue today, though, without it seemingly coming across as simply political campaigning?
Well, you have to campaign politically, and politics means the affairs of the people. That's what it means. And so you have to deal with this politically. And what we really need is change. We've had 50 years, Candino, 50 years of the same thing. After 50 years, we're still talking about getting proper water and electricity. My Lord, proper services. The family islands are all neglected. Still talking about ambulances and fire trucks. My God, 50 years later, you've not built one hospital since the UBP time, not one. We're having this conversation 50 years. We need a change. Bahamians are living on beaches. And so we don't need grandstanding, not by anyone, not including us. We need real change that's going to transform this nation. And that's what we are proposing, real change, to give the power to the people so they can do it themselves.
Speaking about what you're proposing, and it's my final question to you tonight, Lincoln, I want to speak hypothetically. Let's say it was your party on the opposing side in Parliament on December 4th. How would COI have handled this?
It would not have gotten to that, to the point where they needed to do what they did. I would have been holding their foot to the fire. I would have been tabling legislation. I would have been using the powers of the PAC. I would have known how much money was given to the Commissioner of Police. I would have known what they were doing with our loan money. I would have known all of it. The opposition has certain power. He can subpoena them. He can summons them. And if they don't come, they can be fined and sent to jail. That's the law. If they give him any false or deceitful information, they can go to jail. 2 years in jail, $600 fine. So he has power. But it's like they don't want to use it for some reason. It's almost like they're in it together. We just want to put on a show, but we don't want to hit the other side too hard. It's time for real change. I feel that the PLP and FNM are one and the same, and they've been working together to fail us for all these years. So we would not have had to get to that point because we would have used the powers of a real leader of the opposition, like Pinlin did back in the day, and others have done, to bring the change we need to see. Right. And I think that's why they're afraid of us in the House of Assembly.
Listen, perhaps, perhaps. Lincoln, thank you for that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. That was leader of the Coalition of Independence Party, Lincoln Bain, on the record tonight. When we come back, we share our final thoughts. Stay with us. Tonight's spirited debate unfolded against the backdrop of an extraordinary moment in our nation's history. It all stems from the fallout of the U.S. indictment, casting a shadow over the political landscape and fueling an act of defiance by the opposition, an event that's sure to leave its mark on history. The opposition remains firm in its stance, arguing Bahamians deserve better. Meanwhile, critics like the Coalition of Independence calling for a complete political reset, declaring They're ready to take the reins from the current parties in Parliament. Amid the turmoil, the Prime Minister insists he's focused on necessary decisions for the good of the Bahamian people. As the nation stands at a crossroads, with its reputation on the line and a new era of policing on the horizon, only time will reveal the path forward. I'm Gandino Knowles, and until next time, we leave you with this message from your host, Jerome Sawyer.
As we wrap up tonight's episode of this incredible season of On the Record, I want to take a moment to reflect on what an eventful year it has been. This season, we explored stories that informed, inspired, and sometimes even challenged us all. We are incredibly proud to share that this season we picked up 2 prestigious awards, an Elevation Award for Best TV Talk Show and our very first international award, the Scopie Award for Best High Impact Media. To our esteemed guests tonight and throughout the season, thank you for lending your voices, insights, and expertise. Your contributions have made this platform what it is and a space for meaningful dialogue and understanding. To my incredible team, those behind the cameras and in the control room, thank you for your tireless efforts, creativity, and commitment. None of this would be possible without your professionalism. And finally, to you, our viewers, thank you for inviting us into your homes every week and allowing us the privilege to serve you in this way. As we take a short break to prepare for another exciting season, we leave you with a promise to return stronger, more insightful, and more committed than ever to bringing you the stories that matter. Until we meet again in the new year, I'm Jerome Sawyer, and thank you for watching On the Record.